A near-fatal fall, a desperate rescue, and a whispered confession. Jungkook and Jimin face hidden fears on a mountain where one moment changes everything. The wind screamed against the cliff as Jungkook's boots slipped on loose gravel, his body lurching forward into empty air. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to fracture. The world below him opened into a dizzying abyss of jagged rocks and roaring wind. The sky above was a pale silver, clouds dragging across the mountain peaks like slow ghosts. Jungkook's fingers clawed uselessly at the ground as his weight tipped past balance. Then a hand caught him. A strong grip slammed around his wrist. "Jungkook!" Jimin's voice tore through the wind like a blade. Jungkook's body hung over the edge of the cliff, boots kicking against nothing. His heart crashed violently against his ribs. The cold air rushed beneath him, carrying the smell of wet stone and pine. Jimin dropped to his knees instantly, pulling back with every ounce of strength he had. His sneakers scraped against gravel, pebbles sliding past them and disappearing into the vast drop below. "Don't look down," Jimin said through clenched teeth. Jungkook looked down anyway. The valley stretched thousands of feet below them, forests reduced to dark green smudges. A hawk circled far beneath him, so small it looked like a drifting leaf. His breath hitched. "Jimin!" "Look at me," Jimin demanded. Jungkook forced his gaze upward. Jimin's hair whipped wildly in the wind, his eyes wide and fierce with panic. "Trust me," Jimin said. Jungkook nodded weakly. Jimin leaned back, pulling him upward inch by inch. Muscles burned through his arms and shoulders. Jungkook tried to push himself up, boots searching for purchase against the rock wall. Finally, his knee scraped the edge. Jimin seized the moment and yanked him forward. Both of them collapsed onto the ground, rolling away from the cliff. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind roared around them, rattling the tall grass along the mountain ridge. Jungkook lay on his back staring at the sky, chest heaving violently. His hands trembled. Beside him, Jimin sat up abruptly. "You idiot," Jimin breathed. His voice shook. Jungkook turned his head slightly. Jimin suddenly grabbed him and pulled him into a tight hug. The force of it stunned Jungkook more than the fall had. Jimin's arms wrapped around him like iron, holding him so tightly Jungkook could feel the frantic rhythm of his heartbeat. "Do you have any idea what almost happened?" Jimin whispered. Jungkook swallowed. "I lost my footing. You almost died." The words trembled in the air between them. Jimin pulled back slightly, hands gripping Jungkook's shoulders as if checking he was real. "You can't just run around cliffs like that," he said, voice breaking. "You don't even look where you're going." Jungkook managed a small, breathless laugh. "I was chasing the view." Jimin stared at him, disbelief and anger tangled together. "You're unbelievable." But his eyes were still wet with fear. Jungkook slowly sat up. His legs felt like water. The mountains stretched around them in endless ridges of stone and forest. The hiking trail wound behind them through tall grass and wildflowers that trembled in the wind. This trip had been Jungkook's idea. 3 days ago, he had appeared at Jimin's apartment door with 2 backpacks and a reckless smile. "We're going hiking," he had declared. Jimin had blinked at him. "You hate hiking." "I hate gyms," Jungkook corrected. "Mountains are different." Jimin knew something was off immediately. Jungkook had a habit when he was hiding something. He hummed under his breath and avoided eye contact. He was humming that day. Now, sitting on the mountain ridge with the echo of almost falling still shaking his bones, Jungkook looked quieter than Jimin had ever seen him. The wind softened for a moment. "Why did you really want to come here?" Jimin asked. Jungkook didn't answer right away. He brushed dirt from his hands and looked toward the distant mountains. "My grandma used to bring me hiking here," he finally said. Jimin blinked. "You never told me that." I don't talk about it much. Jimin waited. Jungkook continued slowly. She used to say mountains show you the truth about yourself. When you're tired, scared, alone, that's when you figure out who you are. Jimin leaned back against a rock, studying him. And he asked softly. Jungkook's eyes remained on the horizon. I think I came here because I'm tired of pretending I know who I am. The honesty in his voice surprised Jimin. For years, Jungkook had always seemed fearless, jumping into new challenges, chasing dreams without hesitation. But lately something had shifted. There was a quiet heaviness in him. You don't have to figure everything out alone, Jimin said. Jungkook smiled faintly. You're here, aren't you? They sat in silence for a while. The wind carried the distant cry of birds and the rustle of trees far below. Eventually Jungkook stood, brushing grass from his jeans. Come on, he said. The summit's still another kilometer. Jimin eyed the cliff warily before standing as well. Stay away from edges, he muttered. Jungkook raised his hands innocently. Yes, Mom. They continued along the narrow ridge trail. The path curved through rocky slopes and patches of wild lavender that filled the air with a soft floral scent. As they climbed higher, clouds drifted lower around the peaks, wrapping the mountain in pale mist. Jimin walked slightly behind Jungkook now. Not because he trusted the path. Because he wanted to make sure Jungkook didn't disappear over another edge. After an hour of climbing, they reached a quiet plateau near the summit. A small clearing opened between ancient pine trees twisted by decades of mountain wind. Jungkook dropped his backpack onto the grass. We'll camp here tonight. Jimin stretched his arms tiredly. The sky had begun turning gold with late afternoon sunlight. Shadows stretched across the mountains like dark rivers. Jimin began setting up their small tent, while Jungkook wandered toward the edge of the clearing. But this time, he stopped well before the cliff. Jimin noticed. Something about that simple pause made his chest feel lighter. When the tent was finished, they sat near a small portable stove boiling ramen noodles. The warm steam curled into the cool evening air. Jungkook stared into the pot quietly. Jimin. Yeah. Jungkook hesitated. You really saved me back there. Jimin rolled his eyes. Obviously. But Jungkook's voice lowered. I mean it. Jimin glanced up. Jungkook wasn't joking anymore. He was watching the flames flicker beneath the pot, expression distant. If you hadn't grabbed me, Jungkook said softly. Jimin felt a chill. Don't finish that sentence. Jungkook nodded slowly. The noodles finished cooking, and they ate quietly under the fatting sunlight. Night arrived gently across the mountains. Stars began appearing one by one. The world became quiet except for wind brushing through the pine trees. Later they sat near the edge of the clearing watching the sky. Jimin hugged his knees against the cold. Jungkook sat beside him, unusually calm. For a long time neither spoke. Then Jungkook leaned slightly closer. His voice dropped to a whisper, so soft it almost blended with the wind. When you grabbed me today, I wasn't scared of falling. Jimin frowned slightly. Then what were you scared of? Jungkook looked at him. The moonlight reflected faintly in his dark eyes. Losing you. The words were barely louder than breath. But they hit Jimin's heart like a sudden wave of warmth. For a moment he forgot the cold mountain air. Forgot the long hike. Forgot the terrifying moment at the cliff. All he could hear was the quiet sincerity in Jungkook's whisper. And somehow, in that stillness beneath the endless stars, Jimin realized the mountain had shown them both a truth they had been avoiding for a very long time. The wind rose again during the night, brushing through the pine trees with a restless whisper that never seemed to settle. Jungkook lay awake inside the small tent, staring at the faint outline of fabric above him. The moonlight filtered through the thin material, casting pale shifting shadows that moved like quiet ghosts. Beside him, Jimin shifted in his sleeping bag. "You're still awake," Jimin murmured. Jungkook exhaled slowly. "Was I that obvious?" "You sigh when you're thinking too much." Jungkook turned his head slightly. "You've been awake too." Jimin didn't answer immediately. Outside, the wind rattled the branches again. After a moment, Jimin spoke. "You scared me today." His voice was softer than it had been on the cliff, but the tension was still there. Jungkook swallowed. "I know." "You always say that," Jimin muttered. Jungkook frowned slightly. "Say what?" "That you know." Jimin turned toward him in the darkness. "But you still do reckless things like nothing matters." Jungkook stared at the ceiling again. "Maybe I don't know how to stop." Jimin pushed himself halfway upright. "That's not an excuse." "I didn't say it was." Silence stretched between them again, thick with thoughts neither of them fully understood. Finally, Jimin sighed and lay back down. "Go to sleep," he muttered. But Jungkook didn't sleep. Hours later, the mountain slowly brightened with the pale blue glow of dawn. Cold air crept through the clearing, and distant birds began calling somewhere deep in the forest below. Jimin was the first to crawl out of the tent. He stretched stiffly and rubbed his arms, watching the sunrise creep over the mountain ridges. The sky burned slowly from gray to soft gold. Behind him, the tent zipper opened. Jungkook stepped out with messy hair and sleepy eyes. "Morning." Jimin nodded toward the view. "You planned that too." Jungkook squinted at the horizon. "Worth it, right?" Jimin tried not to smile. They packed their gear slowly, the quiet of morning making everything feel calmer than the chaos of the day before. But something between them had shifted. Jimin felt it in the way Jungkook occasionally glanced at him like he wanted to say something, and then changed his mind. By mid-morning, they started descending the opposite side of the mountain. The trail here was narrower, weaving through dense forest where sunlight barely touched the ground. Leaves crunched beneath their boots. "You never finished what you were saying last night," Jimin said suddenly. Jungkook glanced back. "Which part?" "The part where you whispered something dramatic and then pretended it wasn't a big deal." Jungkook chuckled awkwardly. "Maybe I regretted saying it." "Too late." Jungkook kept walking. Jimin sped up until he was beside him. "So," Jimin pressed, "explain." Jungkook shoved his hands in his pockets. "There's nothing to explain." "You said you were scared of losing me." Jungkook sighed. "I did." Jimin stopped walking. Jungkook took a few more steps before realizing and turning around. "What?" Jimin's expression had changed. "You don't just say something like that and move on like it's nothing." Jungkook scratched the back of his neck. "I wasn't trying to start a dramatic conversation." "Well, congratulations," Jimin shot back. "You did." Jungkook laughed quietly. "You're unbelievable." "No, you are," Jimin said. For a moment, they just stared at each other in the quiet forest. Then Jungkook spoke again, more seriously this time. "Fine." Jimin crossed his arms. "Fine what?" "You want honesty." "Yes." Jungkook hesitated, eyes drifting toward the trees. "I've been thinking about leaving the city." Jimin blinked. "What?" "Not forever," Jungkook added quickly, "just for a while." Jimin's stomach dropped. "You decided that without telling me." "I didn't decide yet." "But you were planning it." Jungkook didn't answer. Jimin laughed once, a short disbelieving sound. "Wow." "Jimin." "No, it's fine," Jimin interrupted, though his voice clearly said the opposite. "You almost fall off a cliff yesterday, whisper emotional things under the stars, and then casually reveal you might disappear from my life. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Jungkook stepped closer. I need space to figure things out. From what? Jungkook's jaw tightened. From everything. Jimin shook his head. That's not an answer. Jungkook suddenly looked tired. Maybe because I don't have one. The tension between them thickened like storm clouds. Jimin turned away and started walking again. Jungkook followed. For nearly an hour neither of them spoke. The forest gradually opened into a rocky slope, where the trail curved along another cliffside. Jimin walked faster than before, frustration pushing his steps. Slow down, Jungkook called. Why? The ground's unstable. Good advice, Jimin muttered. Maybe you should follow it too. Jungkook groaned. Are we really doing this? You started it. Jimin stepped over a loose rock. And suddenly the ground shifted. His foot slid. Jimin. Jungkook lunged forward instinctively. But Jimin caught himself against a tree trunk before falling. They both froze. For a moment neither breathed. Then Jimin straightened slowly. I'm fine. Jungkook grabbed his arm anyway. Are you trying to prove a point? Jimin pulled his arm free. No, I'm proving you're not the only reckless one. That's not funny. I'm not joking. They stood dangerously close to the edge again, the drop stretching into a steep valley filled with thick fog. Jungkook rubbed his face. Why are you so angry? Jimin stared at him. Because you keep running away. I'm standing right here. That's not what I mean. Jungkook opened his mouth to argue but stopped. Because Jimin's expression wasn't just angry. It was hurt. You always act like nothing matters, Jimin continued quietly. Like you can just walk away from people when things get complicated. Jungkook's voice softened. That's not true. Then why do you keep doing it? Jungkook didn't respond. The wind blew between them again, colder now. Finally Jungkook spoke. Because staying scares me more. Jimin's anger faltered slightly. Why? Jungkook's gaze dropped to the ground. Because when you stay, people start to matter too much. Jimin frowned. And that's a problem. Yes. The answer came faster than either of them expected. Jungkook looked up again. When people matter too much, losing them hurts more. Jimin stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed softly. You're unbelievable. Jungkook frowned. Why? Because you think leaving first protects you. Jungkook didn't argue. Jimin stepped closer. But it doesn't, Jimin said. It just hurts the people who care about you. The words hit harder than Jungkook expected. He looked away again. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jimin sighed. You're not the only one who's scared, you know. Jungkook glanced at him. Jimin's voice dropped slightly. When you slipped yesterday, I thought I was watching you die. Jungkook felt his chest tighten. Jimin looked toward the valley. I've never been that terrified before. The confession hung quietly in the air. Jungkook stepped closer. I'm sorry. Jimin nodded slowly. Then he looked back at him. But I'm not scared of caring about people, Jimin said. Jungkook swallowed. Maybe you should be. Jimin shook his head. No. His eyes locked with Jungkook. Because some people are worth the risk. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fall silent. The forest, the wind, the distant valley. Everything faded behind the intensity of that moment. Jungkook felt his heartbeat quicken again, just like it had at the edge of the cliff. But this time, the danger wasn't gravity. It was the way Jimin was looking at him. The silence between them didn't fade after Jimin's words. It thickened, stretched, and settled into something far heavier than the wind curling through the mountains. Jungkook felt it in his chest, that strange tightening he always tried to ignore. Some people are worth the risk. Jimin had said it so simply. Too simply. Jungkook looked away first. He turned back toward the trail, adjusting the strap of his backpack as if the conversation had ended. "Let's keep moving," he muttered. Jimin didn't follow immediately. "Running away again?" he asked. Jungkook stopped. The words hit like a stone against glass. Slowly he turned back. "I'm not running." "You always say that too." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "You're really determined to pick a fight today." Jimin shrugged slightly, but there was fire behind his eyes. "Maybe I'm just tired of pretending everything is fine." Jungkook laughed under his breath. "That's funny coming from you." Jimin frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You're the king of pretending." The accusation hung sharply in the cold air. Jimin blinked once. "What are you talking about?" Jungkook stepped closer. "You hide everything behind jokes and sarcasm like it's armor." "That's not." "You never talk about what you feel," Jungkook continued, voice rising. "But somehow you expect everyone else to spill their entire soul for you." Jimin stared at him, stunned. "That's not fair." Jungkook scoffed. "Neither is you acting like you understand me better than I understand myself." The forest around them felt suddenly smaller, as if the trees themselves were leaning in to hear the argument. Jimin crossed his arms. "You're right," he said quietly. Jungkook blinked, surprised by the sudden calm in his voice. "I don't understand everything about you." Jimin stepped closer. "But I understand one thing perfectly." Jungkook said nothing. Jimin's voice dropped. "You're terrified of being loved." The words struck with brutal precision. Jungkook felt something shift deep in his chest. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" "Yes." Jimin tilted his head slightly, studying him. "Then why do you always push people away the moment they get close?" Jungkook looked furious now. "You don't know what you're talking about." Jimin's expression softened, but the intensity remained. "Then tell me I'm wrong." Jungkook opened his mouth. But nothing came out. Because somewhere inside he knew Jimin had hit something painfully close to the truth. The wind rushed between the trees again, scattering dry leaves across the trail. Finally Jungkook broke the silence. "You think this is about love," he said quietly. Jimin didn't respond. Jungkook laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "My dad left when I was 10. Jimin froze. Jungkook rarely talked about his family. "I waited by the window for 3 weeks, Jungkook continued, "every afternoon after school." His voice was calm, almost detached. "I thought maybe he'd come back and say it was a mistake." Jimin felt a knot forming in his stomach. "But he never did," Jungkook finished. The forest was silent again. Jimin spoke carefully. "You never told me that." "I never tell anyone that." Jimin's voice softened. "You didn't deserve that." Jungkook shrugged. "Doesn't matter." "It does matter." Jungkook shook his head. "No, it doesn't." He kicked a small rock off the trail. "It just teaches you something." Jimin watched him carefully. "What?" Jungkook looked directly at him. "That people leave." The simplicity of the statement made it hurt even more. Jimin exhaled slowly. "Not everyone." Jungkook's expression hardened. "You can't promise that." "No," Jimin admitted. "But that doesn't mean you stop letting people in." Jungkook shook his head again. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Jungkook looked exhausted now. I'm trying to protect myself. From what? From caring too much. Jimin took another step closer. You already care too much. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Jungkook's eyes widened slightly. The tension between them became electric. Jimin suddenly realized what he had just admitted. He looked away quickly. But it was too late. Jungkook noticed. What did you mean by that? Jungkook asked quietly. Jimin rubbed the back of his neck. Forget it. No. Jimin groaned softly. Jungkook. You said I already care too much, Jungkook pressed. About who? Jimin's silence was answer enough. The realization spread slowly across Jungkook's face. No way, Jungkook murmured. Jimin shut his eyes briefly. This is exactly why I didn't want to talk about this. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. You're serious? Jimin let out a long breath. Unfortunately. The confession hung between them like a lightning strike. Jungkook felt his heartbeat accelerate again, but this time it had nothing to do with cliffs or falling. Jungkook started, then stopped. Jimin looked up again, forcing a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Relax, I wasn't planning to make it your problem. That's not what I meant. Good, Jimin said, because I'm not expecting anything. Jungkook felt strangely unsettled. Since when? Jimin laughed quietly. Since a long time ago. Jungkook blinked. A long time. Yeah. The forest suddenly felt far too quiet. How long? Jungkook asked. Jimin hesitated. Before you started dating Hana. Jungkook felt another shock run through him. That was 2 years ago. Exactly. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. Why didn't you say anything? Jimin shrugged. Because you looked happy. Jungkook stared at him. And when we broke up, Jimin's smile turned faintly sad. You looked destroyed. The honesty in his voice cut deep. So you just stayed quiet? Jungkook asked. Pretty much. Jungkook felt a strange mix of emotion swirling inside him. Confusion. Guilt. Something warmer he didn't fully recognize yet. You're unbelievable, he said softly. Jimin laughed weakly. Yeah, I get that a lot. For a moment, neither of them spoke again. Then Jungkook asked the question he hadn't expected to ask. Do you still feel that way? Jimin's smile faded. Why would you ask that? Just answer. Jimin hesitated. The wind rustled the trees again. Finally he spoke. Yes. The single word landed like thunder. Jungkook felt the world shift slightly beneath his feet. Jimin quickly looked away again. But it's fine, he added. You don't have to say anything. Jungkook opened his mouth. But before he could respond, a sudden cracking sound echoed through the forest. Both of them froze. Another crack followed, louder this time. It came from somewhere deeper in the trees. Jimin frowned. Did you hear that? Jungkook nodded slowly. The sound came again. Branches snapping. Heavy footsteps. And suddenly Jungkook realized something. That's not the wind. Jimin's expression tightened. The forest around them had gone completely silent. No birds. No rustling leaves. Just the slow, deliberate sound of something large moving toward them through the trees. The snapping branch echoed again through the trees, sharper this time, close enough that the sound vibrated faintly through the ground beneath their boots. Jimin instinctively stepped closer to Jungkook. Please tell me that's just a deer, he muttered. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. His eyes were scanning the forest ahead, dark and alert. Another heavy step. Leaves crushed. Jimin swallowed. That doesn't sound like a deer. Jungkook shook his head slowly. No. Jimin let out a breath that was halfway between a laugh and panic. Great, fantastic. We hiked 3,000 feet into the mountains and now we're about to get eaten. Jungkook raised a hand slightly, signaling him to stay quiet. The trees ahead shifted. Then a dark shape moved between the trunks. Both of them froze. A large black bear stepped onto the trail about 30 feet ahead of them. Jimin's heart slammed violently against his ribs. "Oh my God," he whispered. The bear lifted its head slowly, sniffing the air. Jungkook's voice dropped to the quietest whisper. "Don't run." Jimin nodded stiffly. "I wasn't planning to." The bear looked directly at them now. For a moment, the entire world seemed to pause. Jimin felt Jungkook's hand slowly grab his sleeve. "Stay behind me," Jungkook murmured. Jimin frowned slightly. "Behind you?" "Yes." "That's stupid." "Jimin, you are not fist-fighting a bear." "I'm not planning to." The bear took a slow step closer. Jimin's breath caught. "Jungkook." "I see it." The bear stood still again, watching them. Then it rose partially onto its back legs. Jimin's brain immediately decided this was the worst moment of his life. "Why is it doing that?" he whispered urgently. Jungkook spoke through tight lips. "It's trying to see what we are. Can we tell it we're not interesting?" Jungkook almost laughed despite the situation. The bear dropped back onto all fours. Another step forward. 20 feet now. Jungkook slowly raised his arms to appear larger. "Hey," he called calmly. Jimin stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You're talking to it." "Bears don't like surprises," Jungkook whispered. "We just show we're human." Jimin nodded faintly. "Okay, cool, yeah, completely normal day." The bear sniffed the air again. Then something unexpected happened. Jimin's backpack slipped slightly from his shoulder, and the metal water bottle clipped to it swung loose. It hit a rock. Clang! The loud metallic sound echoed sharply through the forest. The bear jerked its head. Jimin froze in horror. "Oops!" The bear let out a deep huff. Jungkook whispered urgently, "Don't move." Jimin nodded stiffly. But the bear had clearly decided they were interesting now. It began walking toward them again. 10 feet closer. Jimin whispered rapidly. "This is bad." "I know." "This is very bad." "I know." "Do we climb a tree?" "No." "Why not?" "Because bears climb trees." "Of course they do." The bear stopped again. Jungkook slowly began backing away. "Slowly," he whispered. Jimin copied him, trying not to trip over the uneven trail. Another step back. Another. The bear followed. Jimin's voice trembled. "It's following us. Don't panic." "I am panicking." "Quietly panic." The bear huffed again. Then suddenly it took 2 faster steps forward. Jimin grabbed Jungkook's arm. "Jungkook." "I see it." The distance between them and the bear was now less than 15 feet. Jimin's heart was pounding so hard he felt dizzy. "This is it," he whispered. "We're going to die because I dropped a water bottle." Jungkook's eyes moved rapidly across the surroundings. Then he saw it. A steep rocky slope to their right. "Jimin," he said quickly. "Yeah." "When I say go, we climb that slope." Jimin followed his gaze. "That's almost vertical." "Exactly." "And if we slip?" "We won't." Jimin stared at him. "You have a lot of confidence for someone who almost fell off a cliff yesterday." The bear stepped closer again. Jungkook whispered sharply. "Ready." Jimin swallowed. Ready. The bear huffed loudly and took another step. Now, Jungkook said. They moved at the same time. Jungkook grabbed Jimin's arm and pulled him toward the rocky incline. Loose stones slid beneath their boots as they scrambled upward. Jimin grabbed roots and branches, pulling himself higher. Below them, the bear approached the base of the slope. It looked up. Jimin's lungs burned as he climbed faster. Is it following us? He asked breathlessly. Jungkook glanced down briefly. No. Jimin nearly collapsed with relief. Thank God. They climbed another 15 feet before stopping on a small ledge. Both of them bent forward, gasping for breath. Jimin wiped sweat from his forehead. That was insane. Jungkook looked down again. The bear was still below, sniffing around the trail. Then, after a moment, it turned and wandered back into the trees. Jimin leaned back against the rock wall. I almost had a heart attack. Jungkook laughed softly. You handled it pretty well. I dropped a water bottle. Still counts. Jimin's breathing slowly steadied. Then he looked at Jungkook again. You know what's funny? What? I just confessed I've been in love with you for 2 years, and somehow the bear interruption made that conversation less terrifying. Jungkook chuckled. That's one way to process emotions. Jimin studied him carefully. You still haven't answered. Jungkook looked out across the valley from their ledge. The view stretched endlessly, with layers of mountains fading into blue haze. I know, he said quietly. Jimin waited. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck again. That's because I don't know how to answer. Jimin's voice softened. You could start with honesty. Jungkook nodded slightly. Okay. He turned toward Jimin fully now. When you said you cared about me, it scared me. Jimin gave a faint smile. Yeah, you made that part very clear. But it also, Jungkook hesitated. Also what? Jungkook exhaled slowly. It also made me realize something. Jimin watched him carefully. Jungkook's voice dropped. When you almost slipped earlier today, my first thought wasn't about the cliff. Jimin's expression shifted slightly. What was it about? Jungkook met his eyes. It was about losing you. The words settled quietly between them. Jimin's chest tightened. Jungkook. I don't know what that means yet, Jungkook continued quickly. I'm still trying to figure that out. Jimin nodded slowly. That's fair. Jungkook leaned back against the rock beside him. But one thing I do know, he added. Jimin waited. Jungkook glanced sideways at him. The idea of leaving the city suddenly feels different. Jimin's heart skipped slightly. Different how? Jungkook smiled faintly. Complicated. Jimin laughed softly. Welcome to emotions. They sat there for a long moment on the mountain ledge, the tension slowly dissolving into something quieter but deeper. The valley stretched endlessly before them. And for the first time since the hike began, Jungkook didn't feel like running away from the feeling growing inside his chest. The mountain ledge held the warmth of the afternoon sun, but the air between them had shifted again. It wasn't the tense silence from before the bear appeared. This silence felt heavier, deeper, like something fragile waiting to be handled carefully. Jimin leaned forward with his elbows resting on his knees, staring out at the vast valley below them. The forest stretched endlessly, a dark green ocean of trees moving softly with the wind. For a while neither of them spoke. Jungkook could still feel the echo of his own words hanging in the air. The idea of leaving the city suddenly feels different. Complicated. Jimin finally broke the silence. You know what the worst part about that bear situation was? Jungkook glanced at him, the part where we almost died. Jimin shook his head. No. The part where my brain decided that if we were about to get eaten, my last conversation with you would have been me confessing my feelings like an idiot. Jungkook laughed softly. You wouldn't have been an idiot. Jimin raised an eyebrow. Really? Yeah. Jungkook looked back toward the horizon. You would have been honest. Jimin studied him carefully. That's easy for you to say. You didn't just confess something terrifying. Jungkook scratched his cheek awkwardly. Fair point. Jimin leaned back against the rock wall behind them. So he said. So Jungkook echoed. Now what? Jungkook frowned slightly. About what? Jimin gave him a long look. Jungkook. Right, that. Jimin snorted quietly. Yes, that. Jungkook looked down at his hands for a moment. I told you already, he said quietly. I don't know what this means yet. Jimin nodded slowly. I heard that part. But... Jungkook sighed. But you deserve more than silence. Jimin's expression softened a little. That's surprisingly mature of you. Don't sound so shocked. I am shocked. Jungkook chuckled. Jimin continued watching him. You know something though, Jimin said. What? You didn't push me away. Jungkook blinked. What do you mean? Usually when someone gets emotionally close to you, you shut down or change the subject or disappear for 3 days. Jungkook grimaced. Okay, first of all that was one time. It was 4 times. Fine, but that's not the point. Jimin tilted his head slightly. Then what is the point? Jungkook thought for a moment before answering. The point is, I didn't feel like running away this time. Jimin's chest tightened slightly. That's new. Yeah. Jungkook looked back at him again. Honestly, it's kind of terrifying. Jimin laughed quietly. Good. Jungkook frowned. Why good? Because that means it matters. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. The wind drifted across the ledge again, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. After a moment, Jungkook spoke again. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why me? Jimin blinked. That's your question. Yeah. Jimin looked genuinely confused. What kind of question is that? A real one. Jimin shook his head. You seriously don't know? Jungkook shrugged. Humor me. Jimin let out a long breath and looked up at the sky for a moment. Then he began speaking slowly. You're the most frustrating person I've ever met. Jungkook laughed. That's not a compliment. I'm not done. Jimin pointed at him. You're reckless, stubborn, emotionally unavailable half the time, and you have a habit of making terrible decisions. Jungkook grinned. Wow, romance is alive and well. But Jimin continued. Jungkook quieted. You're also the kindest person I know. Jungkook's smile faded slightly. You always show up when someone needs help, Jimin said, even when you pretend you don't care. Jungkook looked down again. And you never give up on people, Jimin added softly. Jungkook exhaled quietly. That's not always true. It is with me. Jungkook looked up at him again. Jimin's voice softened. You've been my best friend for 6 years. The weight of that time hung between them. You stayed when a lot of people didn't, Jimin said. Jungkook's chest felt tight again. So yeah, Jimin finished, that's why you. For a moment, Jungkook didn't know what to say. Then he rubbed the back of his neck again. You're making this very difficult. Jimin smirked slightly. That's kind of my specialty. Jungkook looked out at the mountains again. You know what's weird, he said. What? I've always thought of you as the one person in my life that wouldn't change. Jimin raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? It means you were safe. Jimin frowned. Safe? Jungkook nodded slowly. You were the constant. Jimin stared at him. And now? Jungkook gave a small nervous laugh. Now you're terrifying. Jimin burst out laughing. Great, I confess my feelings and suddenly I'm the scary one. You are, Jungkook said. Why? Because now everything feels different. Jimin's smile softened. Different isn't always bad. Jungkook nodded slightly. I'm starting to realize that. They fell quiet again. But this time the silence felt calmer. After a while Jimin checked the sky. The sun was beginning to lower again. We should get down the mountain before dark, he said. Jungkook nodded. Yeah. They carefully climbed down from the rocky ledge and returned to the narrow trail below. The forest seemed quieter now, as if the bear encounter had scared every other animal away. They walked side by side for a while without speaking. Eventually, Jimin nudged Jungkook lightly with his elbow. You still haven't answered my confession, though. Jungkook groaned. Jimin, I'm just saying. You literally said you didn't expect an answer. I changed my mind. Jungkook laughed under his breath. That's not fair. Life isn't fair. Jungkook shook his head. You're impossible. Jimin grinned. Yet here I am. They walked another 100 yards before Jungkook spoke again. Do you remember the night we first met? Jimin blinked. That party at Taehyung's apartment. Yeah. Jimin laughed. You spilled an entire drink on me. Jungkook winced. It was an accident. You said, oops, gravity is not my friend. Jungkook groaned. Please tell me I didn't actually say that. You absolutely did. Jungkook covered his face briefly. I was trying to be charming. You were trying too hard. Jungkook laughed quietly. But you still talked to me all night. Jimin shrugged. You seemed interesting. Jungkook glanced at him sideways. And now? Jimin smiled. Now you're a lot more complicated. Jungkook nodded. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that too. The trail curved downward through a thick stretch of forest. The light between the trees had begun turning orange with the approaching sunset. Jimin kicked a small rock off the path. You know something though, he said. What? If you do decide to leave the city. Jungkook's stomach tightened slightly. I won't stop you. Jungkook looked at him quickly. Really? Jimin nodded. You need to figure yourself out. Jungkook's voice softened. And you'd be okay with that. Jimin shrugged. I didn't fall for you because you were predictable. Jungkook felt warmth spread through his chest again. But Jimin added. Jungkook waited. Jimin looked at him directly. You should know something too. What? Jimin's smile was quiet but steady. I'm not going anywhere. Jungkook felt his heart skip once more. And this time he didn't try to ignore it. The trail grew steeper as the sun dipped lower behind the mountain ridges. The orange light filtered through the trees in long, thin beams, painting the forest floor with shadows that moved like quiet waves. Jungkook walked slightly ahead, kicking small stones off the path without really noticing he was doing it. Jimin followed beside him, watching the subtle tension in his shoulders. I can hear you thinking from here, Jimin said suddenly. Jungkook glanced sideways. That's creepy. You do that thing when you're processing emotions. What thing? You look like you're solving a math problem in your head. Jungkook chuckled faintly. Well, congratulations. You've discovered my secret personality. Jimin smiled. So what's the equation? Jungkook exhaled slowly. You. Jimin blinked. Me. You plus the possibility of leaving the city plus everything you just said. Jimin tilted his head slightly. And the result? Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck again. Still calculating. Jimin laughed softly. Take your time, Einstein. They continued down the path for several minutes. The forest thickened around them, branches forming a loose canopy overhead. The air smelled damp and cool, carrying the faint scent of moss and earth. Jimin suddenly kicked a loose twig and watched it tumble off the trail. You know, he said casually, when I confessed earlier, I wasn't expecting the mountain to turn into a therapy session. Jungkook snorted. You started that therapy session. Correction, Jimin said. You started it when you almost fell off a cliff. That was gravity. That was stupidity. Jungkook laughed quietly. Fair. Jimin studied him for a moment. You look calmer now, though. Jungkook shrugged. I think the bear helped. Right, nothing stabilizes your emotional life like the possibility of being eaten. Jungkook smiled slightly. Puts things in perspective. They reached a bend in the trail where the trees opened briefly to reveal the valley again. The sky was deepening into shades of purple and gold. Jimin slowed his pace. Can I ask you something else? Jungkook groaned softly. Another emotional interrogation. Relax, this one's easier. Jungkook gestured for him to continue. Jimin looked out across the horizon. When you said you might leave the city, where would you go? Jungkook thought about it. I don't know exactly. That's comforting. I was thinking somewhere quieter, Jungkook said, maybe near the coast. Jimin glanced at him. You living near the ocean. Why not? You hate sand. I do not hate sand. You once complained about sand for 20 minutes. That was because it was inside my shoes. Jimin smirked. Jungkook shook his head. But yeah, he continued, somewhere slower, somewhere I can think. Jimin's voice softened slightly. And you just start over. Jungkook nodded. Maybe. Jimin was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question he had been avoiding. Would you miss me? Jungkook stopped walking. Jimin immediately regretted the question. Sorry, he said quickly. That sounded more dramatic than I intended. But Jungkook didn't move. He turned slowly to face Jimin. Of course I would. Jimin blinked. Jungkook looked almost offended. You're my best friend. Jimin's chest tightened. Yeah, he said softly. Best friend. The words sat strangely now, after everything that had been said earlier. Jungkook noticed the slight shift in his expression. What? Jimin shook his head. Nothing. No what? Jimin hesitated. It's just weird hearing you say that now. Jungkook frowned. Why? Because I told you I'm in love with you. Jungkook's heart skipped again. The words still felt unreal when spoken out loud. Jimin shrugged slightly. It changes things. Jungkook was quiet for a moment. Does it? Jimin looked at him. You tell me. Jungkook hesitated. I don't want it to. Jimin studied him carefully. That's honest. Jungkook looked down at the dirt trail. I don't want to lose what we already have. Jimin's voice was calm but steady. You won't. You don't know that. I do. Jungkook looked up again. How? Jimin smiled faintly. Because I didn't fall in love with you hoping you'd magically become someone else. Jungkook blinked. I fell in love with the version of you that's already here. Something about that sentence hit Jungkook harder than expected. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, Jimin said. It's terrifying. Jungkook laughed quietly. Good, at least we're both scared. Jimin grinned. Oh, I've been terrified for 2 years. They started walking again. The trail narrowed further as they approached a steep ridge path that curved along the mountainside. The fading sunlight painted the rocks with a deep red glow. Jimin suddenly spoke again. You know what the worst part was, though? About what? Liking you. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. That sounds promising. Jimin sighed dramatically. You're completely oblivious. Jungkook scoffed. I am not. You really are. Jungkook looked offended. Give me one example. Jimin stopped walking again. Okay. He pointed at Jungkook. 2 summers ago when we went camping by the lake. Jungkook frowned slightly. What about it? You held my hand. Jungkook blinked. I did not. You absolutely did. When? When we were walking across those rocks near the water. That was because you almost slipped. You kept holding it for 10 minutes. Jungkook's brain stalled. Though. Jimin folded his arms. Exactly. Jungkook rubbed his face. That was not intentional. Jimin laughed. I figured. They kept walking again. After a moment, Jungkook spoke. You never said anything, though. About what? About liking me. Jimin shrugged. You were dating someone. Jungkook nodded slowly. That makes sense. The forest began thinning as the trail dropped closer to the lower slopes of the mountain. The sky had turned darker now, streaked with deep purple clouds. Jimin suddenly asked another question. Can I ask something slightly controversial? Jungkook groaned. That sounds dangerous. Just answer honestly. Fine. Jimin took a breath. Have you ever thought about us like that? Jungkook nearly tripped over a rock. Wow, he muttered. Jimin smirked. That reaction feels very telling. Jungkook recovered his balance and kept walking. You're unbelievable. You didn't answer. Jungkook was quiet. Jimin watched him carefully. Jungkook. Jungkook sighed. Once. Jimin froze. Once. Jungkook nodded slowly. Jimin's brain suddenly felt very awake. When? Jungkook kept walking. I'm not telling you that. Jimin rushed after him. Why not? Because you'll never let it go. You're right, I won't. Jungkook laughed under his breath. Exactly. Jimin grabbed his sleeve lightly. Jungkook. Jungkook looked back at him. Jimin's voice dropped slightly. You actually thought about it. Jungkook shrugged. It was just a thought. Jimin stared at him. That's still a big deal. Jungkook didn't respond. The tension between them returned, but this time it felt different. Warmer. Charged. Jimin finally smiled slowly. Well, he said. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. Well, what? Jimin shrugged. Now I know I'm not completely crazy. Jungkook shook his head with a quiet laugh. You're still pretty crazy. Maybe. Jimin stepped closer to him on the narrow trail. But apparently not wrong. And for the first time since the confession, Jungkook didn't look away. The sky had turned almost indigo by the time they reached the lower trail. The forest here was quieter, heavier somehow, as if the mountain itself was settling into the long stillness of night. Crickets had begun their steady chorus, and somewhere far away an owl called through the darkness. Jimin walked beside Jungkook in silence for several minutes, but the air between them felt charged now in a way that neither of them could ignore. Apparently not wrong. Jungkook kept replaying Jimin's words in his head. He had admitted something he never thought he would say out loud. Once, he had thought about them. Jimin kicked a loose rock off the path and watched it bounce down the slope. "You're thinking again," he said. Jungkook glanced at him. "You started it. By asking a question. By asking a dangerous question." Jimin smirked slightly. "You could have lied." Jungkook scoffed. "You would have known." "True." They walked a few more steps before Jimin spoke again. "So when was it?" Jungkook groaned quietly. "You promised you'd let it go." "I absolutely did not promise that." "You implied it." "I implied curiosity." Jungkook shook his head, amused despite himself. "You're relentless." "I'm invested." Jungkook stopped walking. Jimin turned toward him with an innocent expression. "What?" Jungkook stared at him for a moment. "You really want to know?" "Yes." Jungkook exhaled slowly. "Last winter." Jimin blinked. "Last winter." Jungkook nodded. "The night we got stuck in that snowstorm." The memory surfaced instantly in both their minds. The small roadside cabin. The broken heater. The two of them wrapped in blankets, trying to stay warm while the storm raged outside. Jimin's eyes widened slightly. "Wait, the cabin trip." Jungkook nodded. Jimin laughed in disbelief. "You're kidding." "No." Jimin ran a hand through his hair. "That was the night we had to share one bed because the other one collapsed." "Exactly." Jimin stared at him. "And that's when you thought about us." Jungkook shrugged awkwardly. "You were asleep." Jimin's eyebrows lifted. "Oh, that's comforting." Jungkook rolled his eyes. "I didn't do anything weird." "I didn't say you did." "But you were talking in your sleep," Jungkook added. Jimin froze. "What?" "You kept mumbling nonsense." "What kind of nonsense?" Jungkook smirked slightly. "You said my name." Jimin felt heat rush up his neck. "I absolutely did not." "You absolutely did." Jimin covered his face briefly. "Oh my God." Jungkook chuckled. "You also tried to steal the blanket 3 times." "That part sounds accurate." They started walking again, but the conversation had clearly shifted into new territory now. Jimin glanced at him. "So you were lying awake, listening to me talk in my sleep." Jungkook shrugged. "I couldn't sleep." "And that's when the thought crossed your mind." Jungkook nodded once. Jimin studied him carefully. And what? What did you feel?" Jungkook was quiet for a moment. "Confused." Jimin nodded slowly. "That makes sense." "I pushed the thought away pretty quickly," Jungkook admitted. Jimin smiled faintly. "Of course you did." Jungkook glanced at him. "Are you mad about that?" "No." Jimin kicked another rock. "I'm actually kind of relieved." "Relieved?" "Yeah." Jimin looked at him again. "It means I wasn't the only one feeling something." Jungkook didn't answer immediately, because deep down he knew Jimin was right. They continued down the winding trail until the trees finally began thinning out near the base of the mountain. The faint glow of a small parking lot light appeared in the distance through the branches. Jimin let out a small breath. "We survived." Jungkook nodded. "Barely." Jimin laughed quietly. Cliff's Bear's emotional breakdowns. "Don't forget sleep-talking confessions." Jimin groaned. "Please erase that from your memory." "Never." They reached the gravel parking area, where their car was waiting beneath a flickering street lamp. The air felt warmer here, the scent of pine fading into the dusty smell of gravel and asphalt. Jimin dropped his backpack into the back seat of the car and stretched his arms above his head. My legs are officially dead. Jungkook leaned against the side of the car, watching him. Jimin noticed. What? Jungkook hesitated. Nothing. Jimin narrowed his eyes slightly. You're doing the thinking thing again. Jungkook smiled faintly. Maybe. Jimin leaned against the car beside him. Okay, out with it. Jungkook looked up at the dark sky. Stars were scattered across it like distant sparks. I'm realizing something. Jimin waited. Jungkook spoke slowly. I've spent a lot of time convincing myself that leaving people before they leave me is the safest option. Jimin's expression softened. Yeah. But today, Jungkook continued, I almost fell off a cliff. Jimin chuckled quietly. That seems to be the theme of the day. Jungkook looked at him again. And when I thought I might fall, Jimin felt his chest tighten slightly. The only thing I could think about was you grabbing my arm. Jimin swallowed. Jungkook's voice dropped. And when that bear showed up, Jimin raised an eyebrow. You were thinking romantic thoughts while we were being hunted by wildlife. Jungkook laughed softly. No. But I realized something. Jimin waited. Jungkook took a slow breath. Every dangerous moment today, you were the first person I looked for. Jimin's heart skipped. Jungkook looked directly at him now. I don't think that's something people do with someone who's just a friend. The words hung quietly in the night air. Jimin didn't move. For once, he had nothing clever to say. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck again. This is all very new territory for me. Jimin finally spoke. You don't have to figure it all out tonight. I know. Jungkook glanced at him again. But I do know one thing. Jimin's voice was softer now. What? Jungkook stepped a little closer. I'm not leaving the city. Jimin blinked. You're not. Jungkook shook his head. No. Jimin searched his face. Because of me. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. Then he smiled slightly. Because of us. The word landed softly but powerfully. Jimin felt warmth spread through his chest. Us, he repeated quietly. Jungkook nodded. Yeah. For a moment, they just stood there beneath the quiet glow of the parking lot light, the mountain rising silently behind them. The day had started with a near fall off a cliff. It had nearly ended with a bear attack. And somewhere between fear, laughter, and long overdue honesty, something fragile and new had begun to take shape between them. Something neither of them was running from anymore. The night had grown still around them. The parking lot sat quietly at the base of the mountain, surrounded by dark trees that swayed gently in the cool breeze. The distant forest hummed with the quiet life of insects and night birds, but everything else felt strangely calm after the chaos of the day. Jimin leaned against the car, his arms loosely crossed, still processing Jungkook's words. Because of us. The phrase replayed in his mind over and over. For years he had convinced himself that the best outcome he could hope for was staying by Jungkook's side as a friend, someone reliable, someone safe, someone who never asked for more than Jungkook could give. And yet here they were, standing under a flickering parking lot light after a day filled with cliffs, bears, confessions, and truths neither of them had planned to reveal. Jungkook opened the car door but didn't get in. Instead, he paused and looked back at the mountain. It towered above them in darkness now, its ridges barely visible beneath the star-filled sky. Jimin followed his gaze. You're thinking again, he said softly. Jungkook smiled faintly. Yeah. What about? Jungkook rested his arms on the roof of the car. My grandma used to say mountains show you the truth about yourself. Jimin remembered that. You mentioned that yesterday. Jungkook nodded. I think she was right. Jimin tilted his head slightly. So what truth did you find up there? Jungkook was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Jimin. For a long time, I thought my biggest fear was losing people. Jimin listened carefully. But today I realized something else. Jimin raised an eyebrow. What? Jungkook took a slow breath. My biggest fear wasn't losing people. Jimin waited. It was letting them matter enough that losing them would hurt. Jimin's expression softened. That makes sense. Jungkook looked at the ground briefly before meeting his eyes again. But today you mattered anyway. The honesty in his voice made Jimin's chest tighten. Jimin let out a quiet laugh. You really waited until after a bare encounter to have your emotional breakthrough. Jungkook grinned. Apparently, I need dramatic situations. Jimin shook his head, smiling. You're unbelievable. Yeah. Jungkook's voice softened again. But you stayed anyway. Jimin looked at him carefully. I told you earlier. Yeah. I'm not going anywhere. The words settled between them with a quiet certainty. Jungkook stepped closer. Not rushed. Not nervous. Just steady. For once, he didn't look like someone preparing to run. Jimin noticed the difference immediately. You know, Jimin said quietly, if you suddenly panic and decide to move to the coast tomorrow, I will personally drive there and drag you back. Jungkook laughed. That sounds aggressive. I'm serious. I believe you. Jimin's smile softened. Good. The wind moved through the trees again, brushing softly through their hair. Jungkook looked at him for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised even himself. I'm glad you grabbed my arm. Jimin frowned slightly. At the cliff. Jungkook nodded. If you had. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Jimin's expression grew gentler. I wasn't going to let you fall. Jungkook smiled faintly. I know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jungkook said quietly, almost like a confession to himself. That moment changed everything. Jimin studied him. Because you almost died. Jungkook shook his head. Because you didn't let me. Jimin's chest warmed again at the words. Jungkook continued softly. I've spent years thinking the safest thing was keeping distance from people. Jimin nodded. But when I was hanging over that cliff, Jungkook looked directly at him. Distance was the last thing I wanted. The night air felt warm and quiet around them. Jimin exhaled slowly. You really know how to deliver dramatic lines. Jungkook chuckled. Maybe the mountain inspired me. Jimin leaned back against the car again. So what happens now? Jungkook thought about it. Well, he said, first we drive back to the city. Good plan. Then we sleep for 12 hours. Also a good plan. Jimin paused. And after that? Jungkook looked at him with a calm expression Jimin hadn't seen before. After that, we figure out what this is. Jimin smiled slightly. You're really willing to try. Jungkook nodded. Yeah. Jimin felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. Okay, he said. Jungkook opened the car door again. They both climbed in, exhausted but lighter somehow. The engine started with a quiet hum, headlights cutting through the darkness of the mountain road. As they drove away, the mountain slowly faded behind them, its towering silhouette disappearing into the night. But the truth it had revealed stayed with them. A near fall. A desperate hand reaching out. A hug filled with fear and relief. And a quiet whisper beneath the stars that had melted a heart long guarded by fear. Sometimes the moment that almost breaks you is the same moment that shows you exactly what you've been searching for all along. And sometimes the person who pulls you back from the edge becomes the one you finally stop running from.